All right, I think we're gonna get going here if everyone's ready to start the class. All right, I'm gonna jump into things. So, welcome very much to our November 29th class, where we're gonna be talking about player psychology. Getting to understand how the player's thinking, what's going on up there. Before that, though, I want to give a quick update. So, this is our Design Foundations class that usually leads into a Design Professionals class. We've run the Design Professionals class for about 2 years. I think we've resulted in about 11 games being published, if I remember the exact number. It's been going pretty well. We've had some really good student success where they're taking games from concept to a commercial release in 4 months. And some of these students, they've never programmed before, never made a game before, but we get them making a game. Employers were really liking what they were seeing. I'm pausing the program for 2026 though, because I want to refactor the student employment pipeline. Really a big part of FDI is about getting people into the games industry and working as professional designers. And right now we're also at one of the most challenging employment markets the games industry has ever seen. So I'm pausing the the fundraising part of FDI until we can guarantee student success. So we're doing a massive overhaul of that whole entire pipeline just to make sure that we're able to focus more on your guys' success going forward. We'll then restart it probably in 2027. So unfortunately, we're taking 1 year off just to focus on student success overall. I'm going to try to keep Design Foundations going for 2027. Things are getting pretty busy on my side, but I'd really like to be able to keep the class going, or perhaps we could look at having another person teach it if unfortunately I've got other things on the go. I wouldn't say unfortunately then just means that I'm just getting busy and stuff's going on. But really enjoying the class. We are pausing Design Professionals for 2026 though. We're going to keep the FDI community going though and helping to support you guys through that, however. All right. So, jumping back in, player psychology. Is the audio quiet? Bump this up a little bit, see if that helps. Okay. All right. So getting mouse cursor back. There we go. Okay. So going back in player psychology. So why do players keep acting in ways that seem like they're irrational or just downright crazy? Why do they keep doing that? Why do they keep trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when clearly they know they got a square peg? Clearly they know that's a round hole. What's happening there? So, a big part of that is just being aware that no plan survives encounter with the enemy. So oftentimes, as you're play testing, as you should be as a designer, you're going to notice players behaving in ways that seem nonsensical. Obvious elements that are directly in front of them get completely ignored. And then weirdly enough, if I make it even more obvious, that seems to get it ignored even more. The more I tell the players what to do, the less they understand. What the hell's going on here? Clearly, it's all the players' fault, because clearly I couldn't have made a mistake as a designer. Hint, hint. Good example here is a lot of mobile games will over-explain how their systems work. They will stop everything to explain to you specifically how this mechanic works, and then 2 minutes into the game, players completely forgotten everything. Good reason for that. So, here's an example I was quite liked was the game Ukulele, which is a really good third-person platformer, but it also wound up with a lot of players getting disengaged because they had this giant play field and the game would never tell the player what it actually wanted them to be doing in this play field. They would get confused. They wouldn't really know what they're supposed to be doing. And eventually, after they mess around for a little bit, they'd be like, I'm not really certain what you're asking me for here, so I'm just going to go off and play something else. Counter example of that is the Arkham series. So Arkham Asylum through to, I think the last one was Arkham Knight. They actually have a dedicated button to explain to you gameplay context to exactly address this square peg round hole problem. Because like sometimes you just need to tell players in a way that's really intuitive. So why does it work when Arkham tells a player what to do and how things work? And it doesn't work when little mobile games do it. That's what we're going to get into. So a big part of this is just understanding people are actually quite predictable. You may not understand why they're doing what they're doing, but there is actually a reason you can understand why they're doing what they're doing. Players have common core drives, and much of that counterintuitive behavior actually follows a pretty predictable pattern. I've been working with this kind of stuff and solving these problems for about 20 years, so through seeing a lot of irrational behavior, eventually I realized, wait a minute, there is actually a pretty common pattern here. If you approach this from understanding how people think. So, important thing is to understand the player's core drives. One of the important things for cores is they want to have effective agency. As a player, I want to have agency in the game world that feels effective and meaningful and contextually appropriate. I want to be able to do things in the world that it makes sense for me to be able to do. I also want to be able to pursue a purpose. I want to be able to identify a meaningful objective and pursue that using my agency. Even if it's something that the game directly tells me. A good example is Space Invaders just gives you a high score. It says, hey, we got a high score table. If you hit the high score table, you can enter in your three letters of your name, go on the high score table. And a lot of players are like, okay, cool, that's now my purpose. I now understand what I'm trying to do here. And another one, this important one, is efficiency of execution. If players get frustrated or confused, or it's too difficult to pursue their purpose or execute their agency, they eventually just leave and don't return to the product. Now, friction isn't the same as difficulty. Friction is best understood as just unnecessarily points of frustration. Frustration and confusion are adding friction. Difficulty is more of a thing of, oh, I need to bring my skill set up to this, and the game is operating in a way that is consistent and rational. All right, so let's dive into these. So first one is effective agency. So Minecraft's actually a really good example of this. Minecraft's all about player agency. It's very much about, we're going to give you some tools and a world to use these tools against, and you can do just about anything you want within the rules of the game world, and those rules are broad enough that you're able to express your agency and what you want to do quite effectively. So the thing is, people will aggressively fight for their agency. This is an interesting thing. Even if it is to their detriment, people will do harmful acts to just be able to express their overall agency. The whole entire phrase, you'll cut off your nose to spite your face. A surprisingly common behavior. This also explains why a lot of people will seem to act in non-logical ways. It's effectively like we have an innate need to be able to express ourselves and exist and state our existence within the world. Sometimes we do this in ways that are destructive. Sometimes we do things that are positive. There was a good, and this is even in mice, there was a really interesting psychological experiment where they had made effectively a mouse utopia where the mice didn't have to do anything. They just had to sit around and just be pampered. And a lot of the mice would actually just start to aggressively tear it down because they needed something in their life. They need to have something to express their agency, even at that basic level of being a mouse. Agency is really, really hardwired into what we do. So, of course, that agency has to be over a relevant and meaningful domain. As in, if I'm in a great big third-person adventure and I've only got agency over what my character looks like and I can't actually affect agency in the world, I'm not getting agency within that meaningful domain. In Minecraft, I have agency over the entire shape and structure of the world, which is really exciting. If I only had agency over where I could navigate, that would be far less interesting as a player. So if someone is deprived of agency, they will claim it via destructive actions. As just explained, it's just something we will see. Like even with players, if players get bored, they'll just start screwing around with the game and just being like, well, if I can't play it how I want, maybe I can just start looking at how I'll break this thing. Another thing is also introducing unexpected agency can really help to drive player engagement. This is one of the things that a lot of Metroidvania games work with. They will show you a problem that you can't solve, and then they will suddenly modify a gameplay rule set allowing you to solve that problem. And suddenly the whole entire world takes on this entirely new perspective as a player. Suddenly, like, I've gotten that double jump, or I've gotten a high jump, which is great because as a designer, you just have to tune a value there. You limit the jump, then you increase the jump height. As a player, I'm now reconsidering the entire game world, and I want to go explore it all over again because now I got this new high jump, and I can get to entirely new places because now my agency within this world has unexpectedly increased. Or perhaps not unexpectedly, but there is increased in a novel way. So, a good example of effective player agency, Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game with really high player agency. The entire Grand Theft Auto series is largely about this, is we give you this whole entire world to explore, and then we allow you to, or world to engage with, we allow you to explore that in that world, with that world in interesting ways. And one of the main ways you engage with a city is via cars, so we just make car interaction really interesting. On the other hand, a game like Mad Dog McCree has very low player agency. In the chat, let me know if you're familiar with Mad Dog McCree. So, Mad Dog McCree was an old arcade light gun game where I had my 6-shooter, and the game would play video clips for me, and I would have to shoot a specific spot of the screen during the video clip during a very specific timing window, and if I did that, I would either succeed or fail. The player has almost no agency in what they're doing. All I can do is just point the light gun at the screen and click at a very specific point in a very specific timing window. So in this example, it doesn't matter if I shoot the guy in the leg or the head or the dynamite, or I shoot a window that's behind him. The interactions are already dictated to me. I can only operate in the very narrow band the game wants me to operate in, which was fun for some initial novelty, but then players quickly get bored of it, and there's a reason why the Mad Dog McCree series is largely forgotten about now. But something like Tetris, while it does provide very limited agency, there's not a lot that I can do. I get enough agency within that structure of Tetris. So as a player, I'm looking at my play field here. I can see I've got my boundaries, I've got my puzzle pieces. I can see there's only a two-dimensional plane of movement. The game allows me to move freely within that two-dimensional plane within reason. If the puzzle piece hits an obstruction, it'll be blocked. That's enough agency that as a player, I feel really engaged in this because I'm being presented agency, even though it is limited. It makes sense within the context of the game. There's not really a lot more I want to be able to do with these puzzle pieces. I've gotten really no interest in being able to perhaps dismantle them and place each block individually. Oops, click. Because the game has never presented me a context in which that interaction would make sense. And this is the thing to be aware of as designers, is that agency players want to have, it'll very much depend on the context and the rules and kind of mythology of the world that you present them. If I am presenting them a world of magic, I will expect to be able to interact with that game world in a way that follows the rules of that world's magic. I don't go into Call of Duty expecting being able to cast fire spells or that kind of thing, because I'm never presented as that as being a reasonable level of context or agency within the world, or I'm not in a context where that agency would make sense within the world. Okay, so a really interesting example of how sensitive players can be to how agency is presented. So the game Metroid Other M. This was a really interesting design snafu. This is actually designed by the guy who did Super Metroid. One of the best Metroid games ever. Fantastic game. Metroid Other M presents a gameplay flow that is technically very similar to traditional Metroid structures. I'm exploring an environment, I'll get to a point, I'll unlock a new ability. That new ability will then open up exploration in the rest of the world. In most Metroid games, I gain that ability by being able to, like, I'll defeat a boss, or I'll solve a puzzle, and I'll get rewarded with a new weapon, or a double jump, or a morph ball adjustment, or a new visor, or something like that. In Metroid Other M, they changed it so that after that happens, so when I get to the point in the game where I'm unlocking the ability, I receive permission to use the ability. Samus had the ability the entire time, but then someone gives her permission to use it. Even though mechanically that is very similar, the context feels nonsensical. It feels like I'm actually the player. The way that the agency is being handled within the context undermines the fantasy and the feeling of that agency. And as a result, like, the Metroid Other M is not well regarded within the Metroid series. And a lot of it comes down to that specific narrative decision. It's just this idea of, like, instead of me finding something and collecting it, I get to a point that I'm given permission to use an ability I technically already had. Felt like it undermined the character, and that just caused players to disengage because they weren't respecting proper player psychology there. All right, so for developing effective agency, you really want to provide clear, consistent rules for the player. If they don't have clear, consistent rules, players will not know how to express their agency within the game world, and that will cause them to want to disengage overall. Allowing players to have full access and control of those available tools, of their available tools. So again, example we just covered with Metroid Other M. It tells me I have these tools, but doesn't provide me full access until, again, it gives me permission, which felt really underwhelming as a player. And, like, also, it's, you know, this is an error I see a lot of game designers make, where they will try to simplify the game during its tutorial phase, and they'll do things like remove your ability to open a door or to jump or something like that because they're worried about players getting confused. All that happens is players feel like their agency is being arbitrarily limited, and they become almost passive overall, because they're like, oh, okay, so I can only do the things that you're telling me I can do, and you're just artificially limiting my overall agency here, and they disengage. What else do we have here? So I have your design driven by interacting systems rather than bespoke states. So that's a really useful thing with so if your game is being driven by interacting systems, so Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is actually a really good example of this, where they really leaned into this. Minecraft's another good example, and so is Grand Theft Auto. So within Breath of the Wild, I've got crafting systems and enemy patrol systems and, like, wind systems and ambient wildlife systems and all these different elements that are constantly running in the game world, and all these systems can interact with each other in really interesting ways. I can lure an enemy over to a forest and cut down a tree and have the tree fall on top of the enemy. I think that's something you're able to do. But, like, those kinds of interactions, I'm able to light a field on fire, and the fire interacts with the grass, and the fire propagates through the grass, and then, it will light an enemy on fire or light trees on fire or what have you. Same time, I can spill water onto the fire. It will put the fire out. All these are interacting systems. These are things that are really good for helping to improve player agency. And last one we have is, as we discussed earlier, is having that agency continually grow. Provide the player some very specific limitations, and then slowly release those limitations. And this is a thing that's actually, like, a great kind of cheat as a designer, because it's really easy just to say, like, it's a door you just can't open yet because it's a blue door, and you don't have the ability to open a blue door because you haven't found the blue key. I find that blue key, my agency is opened or is increased, because now I got agency over blue doors. Now as a player, I'm much more engaged. So, second thing you want to focus on to have players engage with your game is pursuit of purpose. So in order for players to be able to really engage in something, they have to know what it is they're trying to accomplish here. So people need to be pursuing a goal. Pursuit of the goal will filter everything the player does. If I'm playing Call of Duty, I've got a gun and I'm told I'm defeating the enemies in a military shooter action. That's my purpose. So I will now be thinking about everything along those lines and trying to pursue engagement along that overall kind of approach. Without purpose, players won't know how to parse what they're looking at. So purpose lets you know what's important and what isn't important in the environment. If I don't give them proper purpose as a player, I actually just get kind of frustrated and confused because I'm like, okay, so like, do I care about the couch? Do I not care about the couch? Is the couch something I can move? Am I supposed to be fortifying this position? What am I supposed to be doing here? You just give them a gun, tell them shoot the enemies. Like, okay, now I understand it. That's what I'm focusing on. That's my goal. So that is how I will now consider and think about my overall agency. So I want to give you a quick example of this, real world example. So imagine you're entering a restaurant. I want you to think about what it's like to go into a restaurant, your overall state of mind. There's your restaurant. It's a nice, comfortable restaurant. But we're going to look at how you think about this restaurant with different goals. So think about entering the restaurant from these different perspectives and the things you would be paying attention to when you went into the restaurant, how you'd see this environment. So you're going into the restaurant and you want to have lunch. You're going to be looking for, is there an available table? Are there any lunch specials? What's the price of the food? Is there a line? Those kinds of things are all things I'm really interested in. I would not be paying a lot of attention to, is there someone behind the bar, where the bathrooms are? I wouldn't really care about what's going on with the roof. I don't really care about where the manager is. I'm mostly just trying to find a table and see what's available for lunch. So if I've got to use the restroom, I'm suddenly not paying attention to the menu. I don't really care if there's much of a lineup. I just want to go in and quickly ask someone, hey, can I just use the restroom for a second? Maybe then I do care about the person behind the bar because they're close to the restrooms. I can just walk up to them and be like, hey, can I just use your bathroom for a second? I really care about the location of the restrooms. Can I see them? Do I know where they are? Or can I find someone who can let me know where the restrooms are? Because the context and my objective has changed, how I view the entire environment has now changed as well. As a designer, if you put players into the same environment and you tell them they've got to race through a checkpoint or they've got to collect a certain number of tokens, they will view that environment very differently. So another example is, hey, let's say I'm going into the space trying to apply for a job. I'm now very interested in where the manager is. I'm curious about if they're going to have a job listing available. I don't care about the location of the restrooms. I don't really care if there's available tables. I don't really care if there's a big lineup. I mean, maybe I do because I don't want to be disrespectful of the staff's time if I am applying for a job. But because my objective has changed as I enter into this environment, how I view that environment now has also changed quite a bit as well. So, regarding this, the Arkham series has a dedicated context button. So normally, I go into I'm playing as Batman, I'm exploring Arkham City or Arkham Asylum, and it will look like a photorealistically rendered game. Stylized, but photorealistically rendered. But there is a dedicated button, I think it's called the Detective Vision button. And in that button, it will actually take away a lot of the photorealism. It will stylize it in a way that highlights my objectives and points of interaction. I'll know, okay, I can interact with this button. These are my overall hostile enemies. The ones in the red have got guns, so I gotta be really careful about them. It's effectively it's an interaction context button, and that really helps to clarify things for the player. This is one of the big problems we got into as we've been pursuing photorealism in games. In the real world, there is a limitless number of things I can interact with in arbitrary and interesting ways. No, because it's the real world. In a video game, we put all these details in there, and then we constantly tell the player, yeah, you can't actually interact with that. You can't actually unscrew that bolt. You can't block that doorway. All that kind of stuff. I remember one of my, I guess, most frustrating moments in a game. I was playing an adventure game, and about 2 hours into the game, they presented a puzzle where I could interact with a subsystem of an existing system for the very first time. What it was is I could open and close a door, and that was something I've been doing throughout the entire game because clear interaction. And there was one door where you can lock it while it's open, so the protruding lock tumbler will prevent the door from closing entirely when a security guard closes it. I couldn't figure it out. Then when I read the solution, I'm like, that has so clearly violated the rules the game has already established. I was just like, you know what? I'm done here. I'm done. I'll just go and play something else. Because like this, it's hard for me to get engaged with a game, or for a lot of people to get engaged with the game, if the game is constantly changing the context and can interact with things. And this is what they do with this detective vision in the Arkham games. They let you know the context and interaction points. Again, keeping the players engaged because they understand how player psychology works. Now, counterexample, Dreams, which was a really impressive, really technically ambitious game. For those of you who don't know Dreams, it was a do-anything game. It was a game where you could make your own games. It was limitless possibilities, and they did all this really interesting rendering research, and it's a wonderfully powerful tool set. You can create these games in VR, and they had a really low player engagement because, like, someone jumps into Dreams and like, okay, what do you want me to do? What am I doing here? And Dreams is like, you can do anything you want. Players like, but like, you got to give me something to do. And Dreams is like, just go ahead with it. Just embrace your creativity. And as a result, a lot of players are just like, I don't really know what you want me to be doing here. And like, as much as we think that players might want to do whatever they want, you can structure those wants, and they expect you to structure those wants so they have an objective to pursue. If it's too broad, if it's too open, they'll get confused and they'll get bored and they'll leave. There's a really clever bit of design that Minecraft does with this, where Minecraft provides direction to players in a rather intelligent and somewhat subtle way. It's you jump into Minecraft, I'm going around, I'm exploring, I'm learning how the game world works. It's got a day-night cycle, so eventually night comes. When night arrives, monsters start to spawn, in particular the iconic Minecraft creeper, which goes up to you and explodes. Everything I interact with in Minecraft at that point is about me walking up to it and directly interacting with it. So when I see the creeper, I go up, I interact with them, or I think I try to interact with them. They explode, they kill me, I respawn, and then I'm like, oh, I gotta find a way to protect myself against those things. That gives you your structure, gives you your objective of like, all right, I have to be able to survive the night. As I start surviving the night, I start learning all these other additional systems and mechanics, and then you just kind of carry it on from there. And then players just start making their own fun because they were given in a subtle way clear limitation and structuring on that wide open interaction space that Minecraft presents. So this is the big issue with Dreams, was that it was just way too vague. All right. Carrying on. So I want to talk very quickly regarding cats. So don't worry, I am going somewhere with this. Tying in everything we can about what we've talked about so far into the subject of cats. Of course, I have to include a fun cat GIF. All right, so there's a really interesting psychological element called anchoring. So what'll happen is someone will identify a goal and then they'll start planning how to achieve it, and any obstructions to that plan are kind of oftentimes ignored or bypassed as the player's trying to achieve the goal. So it's like if I'm trying to, get to a point on the map, there's a rock between me and the point on the map, I just kind of slide around the rock. I don't really see the rock, I just get around it to try to pursue my goal. So like, here let me just kind of this out. It's like, so how players think, so let's say we got like a little, okay, there we go. Here, let me switch my view here. Boop. Can I go? Oh, it's not. Oh. Whoops. All right. Anyways, here, let me just stop sharing for a second. There we go. Okay, great. Okay, so for example, if I am in a space, got your player there, and then I'm trying to get to, got some gold here I'm trying to get to, and I have an obstacle here. As a player, actually what I do is as I want to get to this gold, I actually kind of anchor myself to this gold. I'm like, that's the thing I want. Then as I'm doing that, I don't actually really see this obstacle. I just kind of slide around it psychologically. So I don't go up here and think, oh, obstacle, I will go left, I will go down, I will go to the other side, and then I will go and pursue the gold. I'm actually just trying to pull myself towards that gold, and I'm kind of ignoring all the obstacles that are in front of me as I go towards that. I always like to think of it as kind of like water going through a stream. The player is trying to take the path of least resistance to get to their goal. So they don't actually see this stuff. They just acknowledge it as much as they can to get around it. And this is a really important thing that I see a lot of designers struggle with. Because they think that, oh, players will look at everything as I look at it as a designer, where this is a specific thing I've put in, and I will consider it discreetly. Players don't do that. They'll actually ignore a lot of this stuff because it's just, this is what they're interested in. The obstacle is just something they're kind of trying to ignore. All right, let me... There we go, and we're back. Okay. All right, so good example of this is found this Dragon Ball game. I don't know its name, so I apologize for that. But I'm playing Dragon Ball, and I probably want to do magical kung fu action and throw fireballs at my opponents. And holy crap, does this ever throw a lot of dialogue in front of me and a lot of reading in front of me. Instead of me fighting Nappa there, or dodging an attack, it's like, oh, hold up, let me give you a little short novel for you to read. And as a result, players just kind of press through this stuff because they're trying to get to their goal. They're trying to get to this little objective here, and they just see the text as being in the way, and they just start skipping it. They might read it at the start when they're not clear what their objectives are. As they identify those objectives more clearly, they will start just trying to avoid this stuff. So as a result, you're trying to explain the rules. Players are just skipping past it because they don't see it as being directly related to what they actually want to do. And then, again, they just start getting confused. And they get confused, they get frustrated. They're like, okay, this, the common thing I hear is people saying, well, this game isn't for me. In my perspective, I oftentimes think this is actually, it's not that you don't like the game, it's that the game doesn't like you. The game is not thinking about what people actually want to do as they interact with it. So Fall Guys actually does a really good job of embracing this overall psychological element. So in Fall Guys design, I'm racing against, I think 99 other players. We're all going down an obstacle course to get to a goal. You can see it there with the crown there. It knows that players are effectively trying to get past these obstacles as quickly as possible, and it embraces that overall friction and that give and take. It very rarely has you stop and pause and have to really think about how you're navigating. It's mostly about trying to keep up that overall inertia there. And as a result, this actually feels like a really frictionless and enjoyable gameplay experience. Just enough friction to keep it interesting, but they're well aware of this element that players will anchor very strongly to an objective, and then they'll be trying to pursue goals along towards that objective as efficiently as they can. You know, if there was a key I had to grab and a door I'd have to open on this obstacle course, that would be too much cognitive friction for players, and that would actually be really disengaging on the overall experience. So, third thing I want to get into is efficiency of execution. So, the thing is, a lot of people, oftentimes people will be seen as being lazy because they will do things they won't be reading, or they'll be skipping past important information, or they'll try to skip steps. And it's not that they're lazy, it's that they're efficient. It's an evolutionary survival element. Effectively, what we're trying to do is we're considering the caloric cost of our actions. I want to get to my goal as efficiently as possible. I want to get to this as quickly and efficiently as I can. If I am going about this in a suboptimal pattern, I am wasting calories, and that is evolutionarily not a great strategy. So cognitively, psychologically, we're always trying to get to our goals as efficiently as we can. If I start having to use an expected amount of calories to do something, if it's taking too much effort, too much work, that starts to annoy and frustrate me. And again, like this is again saying that there's a difference between frustration and confusion versus overall challenge. So that has to be balanced against meaningful challenge and effort. A problem is really interesting, and those are things that will keep players engaged, a meaningful problem. Frustration is one of the things that will cause them to disengage overall. And it is a challenge to get a clear definition of what one is and the other isn't. And generally that's just one of those things that as you start working in the industry, you'll start to get a feel for. But usually I find it's within frustration, it is the rules of the world have been inconsistent, or they violated their prior prior way they presented themselves. And a challenge is just something where as a player I realized that my personal approach to this was actually flawed, so I will reevaluate my approach. So Halo. The Halo series is very clear about player objectives and interactions. It gives me a gun. I'm thinking, okay, cool. That's a tool I have. I want to be shooting things. It gives me obstacles or targets. They're in the far side of the game field. So I'm like, okay, I probably want to be shooting those targets. That is how the game is designed. There are small obstacles, the rocks on the play field. I understand I cannot shoot through these rocks. Those rocks will be both cover and also a hindrance. And now I've got like an interesting and intuitive game field there overall. So players are like, okay, yep, I get it. I want to shoot at the targets. Navigation getting there isn't too difficult. And I can kind of engage in the gameplay loop overall. Counterexample of that is Mirror's Edge, which is a parkour game that came out PS3, Xbox 360. Players are pretty much effectively trying to free run over top of a series of rooftops and avoid security guards as they're pursuing an objective. The controls for Mirror's Edge are surprisingly technical. I know a lot of players that, like, there's some players who absolutely love the game, but I also know a lot more players that really kind of just bounced off of it because they're like, okay, I'm trying to climb up this railing here, and like I hold this and this is the button. No, that's not quite the rail climb button combination. Fuck, what's the rail climb button combination? And like, you know what? This is just getting too frustrating. I'll just go and play something else. Actually, I think as a result of the parkour design miss of Mirror's Edge, you saw a lot of games afterwards really streamlined their parkour controls. Because parkour was an interesting idea, and the idea of adding some gameplay mechanics to navigation, or more gameplay mechanics to navigation, was a really promising concept. But Mirror's Edge, it got too complex. So you saw Assassin's Creed really refined it, where effectively you just hold like a dedicated parkour button and forwards, and Ezio or whoever your character is in Assassin's Creed will just naturally parkour up obstacles. And then in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, they streamlined it even further, where they almost had made it like a modal switch, where Link, if he gets up to an obstacle, he'll either climb over it or attach himself to it and start climbing along it, and just really simplified the overall navigation there. In Assassin's Creed, there's a lot of specific rules about what you can climb and can't climb. Sometimes it can be a little arbitrary, even though the interaction is more streamlined. Legend of Zelda, they just made it global and said, yeah, if it's a vertical surface, you can pretty much climb it. They do have a couple of exceptions there, but they assume the interaction is the default. So another thing to be aware of is, as you're designing a game, is too much information is confusing and actually can communicate less. So having too much friction can cause players to disengage. So can having too much information. So this, I forget which MMO this is. The name's escaping me, but for this game, they're telling you a lot. There's a lot that's happening here. And for some players, this is great. For most players, this really isn't. They got all this stuff they can do, and they're telling you about all of it all the time. As a result, as a player, I don't really know what you want me to focus on. I don't know how to parse the information. I don't really know what my objective is unless I'm sitting there specifically reading everything. So, counterexample, the user interface for World of Warcraft, which is a wonderfully successful MMO, they just really streamlined things down. They really focus on your character, the environment, a few hints there about your overall status in your inventory, but certainly much easier to parse overall than this inventory, even though it is telling you far, far less. So, really interesting example of this in modern design is the layout for modern cars. This has been a really interesting thing because the design for car interiors is a design problem that thousands of people around the world have worked on for I'd want to say about 100 years at this point. And as a result, there's a really refined design problem. And then they're like, you know what? Smartphones are real popular. What if we made the interior of a car more like a smartphone? And everyone kind of hates it. It has gotten so simplified that this has actually gotten quite confusing for a lot of people. So one of the things that a lot of people overlook is we're actually very tactile. We like holding and touching things. On a smartphone, the reason why a smartphone works is because I can look at the smartphone all the time, and the smartphone doesn't make a lot of time demands on how I interact with it. It's responsive, but I can look at it. If I'm a little confused, I can just look at it for a little longer and then I can tap it. On a car, that's a terrible experience because I'm trying to turn on my headlights and I can't feel for the headlight controls, so I don't know where they are. I'm going through a menu on a touch screen, and now I'm not looking at the road. I'm looking at my touch screen, and it just becomes, there's no tactile sensation there. So as a result, I'm really not really certain exactly what I'm interacting with. It's been a really interesting kind of design miss for the auto industry that they've really been walking back recently. I guess For clarity, you have to also understand the context that people are interacting with your design. This was something that was meant to look good on a stationary show floor. In the actual context that people are interacting with these interfaces, that is like on the road, in traffic, possibly at night on an icy mountain road, this becomes a terrible experience. And again, that's because psychologically, I'm focusing on the task at hand, and I want to be able to get to that as efficiently as possible. This touchscreen interface adds so much additional friction because it's assuming I will focus on it entirely as opposed to the actual thing I want to be focusing on, the road. That just becomes really frustrating as a user. All right. So, go through a quick summary of what we've gone over regarding player psychology. So the first one is agency trumps all. If players do not have agency in your game or feel like that agency is being artificially limited, they will most commonly disengage, or they'll start pursuing that agency in a potentially destructive manner. There are some game designs where this can work. I've seen a couple of kind of indie crafting games where players just kind of make their own mayhem, and that's part of the fun. That can be a dangerous assumption to make as a designer. You generally want to, I find it's much more effective to give the player an effective structure for them to work within than just assume that they will enjoy engaging in chaos in that space. Another thing is objectives anchor players. So if I'm going to be expressing my agency, I need to know what I'm pursuing as I express that agency overall. So you need to give the player clear and intuitive objectives. And the last one is reducing unnecessary work. So this is the thing of as I'm anchored to my objective, if there's anything that is tedious or confusing or inconsistent, then I as a player will disengage from that or find that overall frustrating. I won't find it interesting because I'm trying to get to my goal as quickly as I can. I'm not going through this process mechanically. So that's a thing with, like in that example from the Dragon Ball mobile game. If I'm trying to engage in a magical kung fu fight and you're asking me to do a bunch of technical reading, that really isn't very engaging as a player. I'm just going to be trying to get around that so I can pursue my goal overall. All right, so that wraps it up for the day. Does anyone have any questions? Just waiting here to give chat a second. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here. If there aren't, I think we can wrap things up. Let me know in the chat. All right, if there's no questions, they think we're going to wrap it up there. All right, I think that's it then. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and I will catch you all next week. Thanks for attending.